Friends of coffee lovers, this time we will explore the history of coffee so that it becomes a global drink. Let's explore it. The history of coffee dates back to the 9th century. People first knew coffee only existed in Ethiopia, Africa, whose original beans grew on the highlands in Ethiopia. However, when the Arabs expanded their trade, coffee beans became known to North Africa and were cultivated en masse there. Starting from North Africa, coffee beans began to penetrate Asia to Europe, and already Trent as a drink began to spread. But before we discuss this further, we will try to trace the legend of the famous story. Namely, the story of Si Khaldi and his goat and the story of Ali bin Omar al-Shadhili. This legend tells the beginning of humans knowing this coffee. Once upon a time, there was a young goat herder named Khaldi who lived in the mountains of Ethiopia. One day, Khaldi was tending to his goats when he noticed that they were acting strange. They were jumping around and prancing, and they seemed to have a lot of energy. Khaldi was confused, because his goats were usually calm and docile. Khaldi decided to investigate, and he soon discovered that the goats had been eating berries from a strange tree. The berries were red and fleshy, and they had a strong, bitter taste. Khaldi decided to try one himself. And he was surprised to find that he felt more alert and awake after eating. Khaldi realized that the berries must have been giving the goats their energy, so he took some of them to the local monastery. The monks were skeptical at first, but they agreed to try the berries. After eating them, the monks were amazed at how much more alert and focused they felt. They soon began to use berries to stay awake during long hours of prayer and meditation. The news of the monks' discovery quickly spread. And soon people from all over Ethiopia were coming to the monastery to try the berries. The berries became known as Khaldi's beans, and they soon became a popular drink throughout the country. Khaldi's discovery of coffee is said to have changed the world. Coffee helped people to stay awake and alert, and it also helped to improve communication and trade. Coffee houses became popular meeting places, and they played an important role in the spread of ideas and culture. Today, coffee is enjoyed by people all over the world. It is a symbol of hospitality and friendship, and it is a reminder of the legend of Khaldi, the goat herder who discovered the magical beans. Another story is set in the city of Mocha, Yemen. There was a physician who was also a devout Sufi. His name was Ali bin Omar al-Shadhili. Omar is very famous as a reliable healer who can cure diseases by doing medical action and prayer. Unfortunately, what Omar did during diseases was not favored by the local rulers. By spreading gossip and intrigue, Omar was considered to be in league with the devil in healing his patients. Finally, with this gossip, the people of Mocha city expelled and exiled Omar outside the city. In isolation and expulsion, Omar found a cave and took refuge in it. Inside the cave, he felt hungry and tired from traveling for days. Because of his hunger, he looked for something to eat and unexpectedly found red berries. Omar immediately ate the fruit to get rid of his hunger. Because it tasted bitter, Omar tried to process the fruit, roasting and boiling it. However, the coffee beans that Omar processed were still inedible. He could only drink the water. Unexpectedly, the boiled water he drank earlier gave him extra energy. Long story short, the brewing water Omar made was very famous, and people begged Omar for it. Until this incident was heard by the ruler of the city. Then Omar was called back to live in the city. From this story, this elixir in the form of black liquid is called mocha. Coffee was originally known in the plains of Africa around the 9th century, precisely from the country of Ethiopia. This region was known as Abyssinia in the past. However, it is not known exactly how the people of Abyssinia utilized the coffee plant. At that time, the coffee plant was probably only a commercial commodity brought by Arab traders from Abyssinia to Yemen. At that time, Yemen was known as the center of the coffee trade in the Arabian Peninsula, precisely in the Mocha port area, Yemen. The use of coffee as a beverage was first popularized by the Arabs. Around 700 to 1000 AD, coffee was first recognized by the Arabs as a body-strengthening drink that helped them to worship at night until dawn. The spread of coffee began at that time along with the spread of Islam. In 1000 AD, Ibn Sina investigated the chemical substances of coffee. His document is the first known document dissecting coffee from medical and health science. The medical expert explained that coffee originated in Yemen and was already widely grown in the Arabian Peninsula and its surroundings at the time he lived. Ibn Sina recognized several benefits of drinking coffee water, including maintaining a healthy body, making the skin clean, and reducing skin moisture. The aroma of coffee is also considered to stimulate the health of the body and mind. Abdul Qadir al-Jaziri, who wrote Umdat al-Safwa in 1987, recounts the spread of coffee in the Islamic world. According to him, coffee arrived in Mecca in the 15th century. Coffee shops have sprung up in the cities of Mecca and Medina, which are always crowded every Hajj season. The pilgrims tasted the coffee and were impressed by tea. The spread of coffee was so fast during the Ottoman Empire. Many coffee shops opened and began to be crowded at that time. But according to the Greeks, they were the first to open the first coffee shop in Constantinople in 1475 in a place called Kivahan, currently called the Tahtakali district. Although Turkish historians doubt it, because according to Turkish historians, coffee was only brought to this region in 1517 when Sultan Selim I, 1512–1520, conquered Egypt. Although another story tells that the governor of Yemen, Ostamir Pasha, was a coffee lover who brought coffee beans when he was summoned to Constantinople, where he taught Sultan Suleiman, 1520–1566, how to drink coffee. So it is likely that Ostamir Pasha had known about coffee drinking before. Governor Pasha's coffee drinking is said to have been successful with his coffee politics approach. It said that he succeeded in conquering the Sultan's heart with a cup of coffee he served. As per the Sultan's request, he sent a special barista who was responsible for providing the Sultan with coffee and the necessary equipment to make it. But the tradition of drinking coffee had caused political turmoil in Constantinople as well. Earlier in Cairo, the clerics had called for coffee drinking to be banned due to its stimulating properties. The Council of Ulama, during the reign of Suleiman and his successor, Shaykh al-Islam Abbasud, issued a fatwa for coffee. As a result of this fatwa, in 1543 sacks of coffee were thrown overboard by ships transporting it from the main coffee-producing regions. But a few years later, this fatwa was ignored and the first coffee shop was opened in Istanbul in 1555. Towards the end of the 16th century, an influential cleric issued another fatwa, in the form of a poem, saying that suspicions about coffee were unfounded. The history of the tradition of enjoying coffee has never been unanimous. As far back as 900 BC, the philosopher Homer makes reference to coffee as a mysterious black drink with the power to prevent drowsiness. The same reference is repeated in several Arabic legends from the same period. But the fragrant smell of coffee changed everything. Coffee cultivation quickly spread throughout the region. Drinking coffee then became a part of the tradition. The history of coffee continues in Europe starting in 1615 by a Venetian merchant in Italy. Coffee became known in continental Europe because of the business relationships between Venetian merchants and their relations from North Africa and the Middle East. The first coffee shop in Venice was established in 1645. By 1763, the number of coffee shops had grown to 218. From Venice, coffee spread to other regions in Italy, such as Turin, Genoa, Milan, Florence, and Rome. Apart from Venice, coffee also developed in the Netherlands. In 1616 coffee was brought from Mocha, Yemen, to the Netherlands. The Dutch were one of the first European countries to successfully cultivate coffee. After enjoying the delicious taste of coffee, Venetian merchants were convinced that this black beverage had high economic potential. So they imported it. However, coffee was initially rejected by religious institutions in Italy. Pope Clement VIII, who lived from 56 to 1605, had banned coffee consumption. However, after tasting it, the Pope allowed and blessed it, making it easier for coffee to spread in Europe. History: the first coffee shop in England, according to the diary of Samuel Pepys, a British Navy administrator, was established in Oxford in 1650 by a Jewish man named Jacob, in the building now known as the Grand Café. Meanwhile, the first coffee shop in London opened in 1652 in Street Alley in Cornhill Churchyard, run by Pasquarossi, a Greek man who in 1672 also established a coffee shop in Paris. He had worked for Turkish merchants and thus knew the intricacies of coffee. In 1658, another café appeared in Cornhill, called Sultan's Head. By 1700, there were already about 500 coffee shops in London. The coffee houses attracted many customers who were merchants, shippers, brokers, and artists. Many businesses grew out of the coffee houses. Lloyd's of London, for example, came into existence at Edward Lloyd's Coffee House. The popularity of coffee shops in Europe boomed in the 17th to 18th centuries. British people drank coffee in cafes while reading newspapers, smoking cigarettes, and talking about politics and social developments of the time. As a result, coffee shops had to register themselves legally because the activities in coffee shops were considered a threat to the British royal government. In fact, in 1675, the monarchy considered coffeehouses a place to plan rebellion, so King Charles II banned people from gathering in coffeehouses. However, the ban was never actually enforced. Because, only 2 days after it was first issued, the ban was lifted so that coffee shop owners and their customers could breathe a sigh of relief. The history of coffee in the UK is the role of the Dutch in introducing coffee. In 1714, French King Louis XIV received a donation of coffee trees from the Dutch for his collection at the Royal Paris Botanical Gardens, Jardin des Plantes. At the same time, Gabriel Mathieu de Clou, a navy man, brought the trees to the island of Martinique, although Louis XIV refused. Gabriel sneaked his troops into the Jardin des Plantes and stole the coffee plants. Gabriel's success in bringing coffee plants to Martinique was a great achievement because the cultivation of coffee plants there was quite good. In just years, the island has been filled with around 18 million coffee trees with different varieties and makes one of the rich sources of coffee types in the world. The presence of coffee in Europe gave it a positive stigma in the lives of Europeans. Beer and wine were gradually abandoned and coffee was substituted for beer and wine. They drink coffee more massively, so the quality of their work is much improved, they say. It wasn't until 1615 that Europeans were formally introduced to coffee. At that time, traders from Venice, Italy, brought coffee home from the Levant, which is now known as the Middle East, including Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. A year later, as galacoffee.co.uk owner James Grierson wrote in the article History of Coffee, Part 3, Colonization of Coffee, it was the turn of the Dutch to bring coffee from the Adan region, Yemen, then cultivate it, from Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, to the archipelago. The Dutch eventually monopolized the world coffee industry, and could even determine price. And at its peak, in the 1700s, Java-produced coffee competed with coffee from Mocha, Yemen, as the most popular coffee product in the world. In 1650, when the lemon drink was already well known in Italy, coffee began to be included as another sale, while coffee shops in England had sprung up and gave a new nuance to the social community as a drink and conversation. As coffee has spread to major European countries, there is an old story in contention. Emerging parties, according to Linda Civitello in Cuisine and Culture, A History of Food and People, in 1679, some French doctors had a bad opinion of coffee. According to him, coffee makes people no longer want wine, and can give fatigue and cause bad things to the human brain, mind bodily functions, and cause impotence. On the other hand, there is another French doctor, Philippe Sylvestre Dufour, who in his book positively assesses drinking coffee, in 1696. Another French doctor also said coffee is good for the body and refreshes the skin. The emergence of coffee in the public sphere gives a new dimension to social politics in Europe, where many people have left alcohol and switched to coffee when chatting in coffee shops. This is confirmed by Linda Civitello, as written in The Economist on July 7, 2011. Back to the coffee house. From this phenomenon, scholars began to worry because in the public sphere, political matters were discussed in coffee shops. French historian Michelet, quoted by Mark Pendergrast in Uncommon Grounds, The History of Coffee and How It Transformed Our World, explains that the invention of coffee as a profitable revolution and provides new habits, also modifies human temperament. It further explains that the ideas circulating in discussions in coffee shops eventually accumulated in the events of the French Revolution. In Germany, the popularity of coffee was so pronounced, by the ruler, Frederick the Great. In 1777, he instructed that beer become a traditional German drink, according to him. The increase in coffee consumption had an impact on a lot of money coming out of the German state as well as the French state. Coffee has rivaled wine. Even in England, King George II was very antipathetic to coffee because many people talked about him and even made fun of him. Not to be outdone, the women petitioners of 1674 put up the fiercest resistance to the existence of coffeehouses in London. They protested against the waste of men's time in coffeehouses, and the inability of women to go to coffeehouses, as in France. English King Charles II issued a proclamation on the prohibition of coffeehouses on December 29, 1675, on the grounds that people were neglecting their social responsibilities and disturbing the stability of the kingdom. The royal party in London became increasingly restless, which climaxed 2 days before the regulation took effect. The king resigned. Not to be outdone in Wiener, Austria, it seems to repeat a classic coffee story that has happened elsewhere. In July 1683, defeated Turkish troops left behind 500 large sacks of coffee, which were considered camel food, and threw the sacks into the fire. Ola Kolchitsky, a soldier who had lived in Arabian Jazeera, was awakened by the smell of burning coffee. Kolchitsky took a sack of coffee and began to process coffee until he opened the first coffee shop in Vienna. Not long after, coffee colored the intellectual life of the city. In coffee shops, various backgrounds and characters, and according to Mark Pendergrast's notes, in coffee shops people read, chat, and various aromas mixed together. Now Kolchitsky is made a statue as a tribute, and as a result, Kolchitsky is a very famous, and his statue is immortalized in the city of Vienna. Coffee contains carbohydrates, protein and small amounts of fat, caffeine, magnesium and chemicals, such as polyphenol containing chlorogenic acid and koenic acid, and also diterpenes containing cafestol and coeol. Based on several studies, drinking coffee is beneficial for maintaining brain health, such as reducing the risk of developing dementia or senile dementia. This is because the caffeine content in coffee can help concentration, increase alertness, improve mood, and reduce the risk of depression. The journal Practical Neurology explains the benefits of drinking coffee can prevent a decrease in brain cognition, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's disease. According to the Harvard School of Public Health explains that coffee can kill the development of cancer cells. In the American Cancer Society also explains that several studies prove the benefits of coffee can reduce the risk of several types of cancer, including liver cancer, prostate cancer, endometrial cancer, mouth and throat cancer. Coffee lover friends, we have explored the history of coffee, and now we explore coffee-producing countries spread around the world, namely 1. Brazil. 2. Vietnam. 3. Colombia. 4. Indonesia. 5. Ethiopia. Coffee lover friends, that's all for this video. Hopefully this video can be useful and provide information as learning and knowledge about coffee. Thank you, and please subscribe and like.